Thank you for joining the second session of 3 on Israeli dilemmas and contemporary voices, in which we're asking ourselves what it would mean to be a Zionist, a supporter of Israel today. And one of the values close to the heart of our communities is to support those groups who work so hard, often in challenging circumstances, to bridge divides and to bring people together, Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And so we're very, very privileged to have with us today Rabbi Yoav Ender, who's director of the Hanaton Education Center. And we've met in person at Hanaton, and you work closely with the nearby villages, particularly Kfar Manda, and we're going to bring you in a little bit later in the discussion. But we're going to begin with Jessica Martin and Itai Flesher from Kids for Peace. And Jessica is a Christian Palestinian. I'm reading your bio that you've given us, thank you, in East Jerusalem, studying Hebrew at the Rothberg School, Mechina, and you'll be studying business and law at the Hebrew University. You've been involved as a participant, as a counselor, as a leader in Kids for Peace for over a decade. And it's really appreciated that you've joined us. And Itai, you spent many years involved as a school teacher and in Australia, at good events around the world, anything from Israel film to Torah and modern Jewish identity. You're the education director now of Kids for Peace in Jerusalem and where you live. So I'm going to begin this will be a sort of shared dialogue between the three of us by asking Jessica, Itai, tell us a bit about the work of Kids for Peace. Should we begin with you, Jessica, and then come to you, Itai, if that's okay?
Okay, sure. So my name is Jessica Martin. As you mentioned, I'm 18 years old. I recently just finished my first year at the Mechina program at the Hebrew University, and I had to do it because I didn't speak very good Hebrew at first. Now, thankfully, I'm fluent and I can start my studies at the university. So I've been in Kids for Peace, as Itai mentioned, for over a decade. I started out as a youth when I was 10 years old, and I've gradually worked my way up in the organization, and now I'm the 6th grade advisor and the grade leader. As for some questions I'd like to answer to why I joined, the main reason why I wanted to join Kids for Peace is because I saw in Jerusalem that there was so much diversity, so many people from many different places, from many different backgrounds, from many different religions. So it was something that was really interesting for me, that I wanted to get to know these people more. Because these people are living right next to me, and it always has been a question for me to get to know other people, and the organization was a chance for me to spread out my wings and make up more connections with people, and it was a great opportunity for me to make friends, and it really helped me become a better person, to understand people who are different from me, people who are different from my religion. It has taught me to accept and respect other people who have different opinions than I do. And it was a very enriching experience as a whole. As you can see, I'm still stuck around in the organization. So I don't know what else to say.
That's great. I mean, there's really enthusiasm there.
Yeah.
Itai, can you give us some background about the organization and the kind of work it does, that it brings, great people like Jessica into it in this way?
Before I speak though, Jessica, I think there's something you mentioned that I think the audience might be interested in. You mentioned that you grew up in Jerusalem, the so-called United Capital of Israel, without speaking Hebrew. And that's an experience many people have in East Jerusalem, to grow up in this city without speaking Hebrew. Can you explain why is it that so many Palestinians don't speak Hebrew? And then also how now learning Hebrew in the Mechina has changed your experience of the city?
So yes, that's a very important point that Itai mentioned. So thank you, Itai. I grew up in East Jerusalem in a neighborhood called Bet Hanina. It's also surrounded it's like in Jerusalem, like your neighbors are my neighbor is Jerusalem and Bisgat Ze'ev, so it's a Jewish neighborhood. Even though that I grew up in Bet Hanina, I never got the chance to really speak Hebrew. The only interactions we really had, like going to Israeli places, was like the mall, the doctor, and normally my parents would do the conversation and it wouldn't be me. At school, Hebrew wasn't valued as much. The school didn't like pay much attention, and we would always stay. I don't know if you guys know this, but it's always like the certain ramot of Hebrew, and I stay like throughout like several years of my school, I only stayed at Rama Aleph, which is like the lowest level of Hebrew, even though I've taken it for years and years. It wasn't the best teaching of the language, even though I was at one of the best schools in the country. But going to the Mechina program, like I gradually became able to speak, like I was able to speak Hebrew really, really quickly, and now I speak really fluently, and I understand almost, you can say 80 or 90% of what people are saying to me, which is really great. It helps me deal in my life, like go to the bank and go to the doctor, go to the mall. It really helps me communicate with other people and try to understand them. As well, in my work with Kids for Peace, I can understand like what the kids are trying to say, since some kids do not speak fully Hebrew, fully English or Arabic. So it's a chance for me to communicate. I still need a lot of practicing, especially that I really want to study law, and law language in Hebrew is really difficult, but it's still way much better than what I used to have in the past. And I'm really grateful for this experience and this year that I got to learn the language.
So you're trilingual because your English is brilliant as well.
Thank you.
Incidentally, I think I've met some years back the head teacher of the boys' school in Beit Hanina, because it's part of a project that our community very much supports, of twinning schools and bringing classes together, led by Simon Lichman. So now that was a very important question, and thank you, Itai. Coming back to you.
Yeah. So the reason I asked Jessica to share that is, I know I look young, but I'm actually a little bit older than Jessica. And I have two children of my own who are learning in West Jerusalem, and probably no surprise to you, they know almost no Arabic, because in their school they learn a little bit of Arabic in 7th and 8th grade, but it's mainly Fusha, which is like written Arabic. It's not Amiya, the spoken Arabic. So they can't really have a conversation with anyone in Beit Hanina. And unlike Jessica and I, who are obviously fluent in English, most kids in Jerusalem speak very little English unless they watch Friends reruns and they pick it up from Netflix. But you know, it's not a language necessarily that in Jerusalem people would be fluent in, like other parts of the country where you find much better English. And so part of what we do at Kids for Peace, and I've just made a few slides just to sort of show you some pictures of our work, is we run everything in Hebrew and Arabic. So everything is done with translation. All of our staff speak at least 2 of the 3 languages, and many of them speak 3 languages. And the purpose of Kids for Peace is to empower youth to create more peaceful communities. Before Corona, our programs were at the YMCA, which for those that are familiar with, it's opposite the King David Hotel, and it's seen as kind of like a neutral place in Jerusalem. It's not really East Jerusalem, it's not really West Jerusalem. It's seen as a place where you could speak English, Hebrew, and Arabic and feel comfortable, which is not always the case for many other sort of public buildings in Jerusalem. And what we do at Kids for Peace is we have weekly programs. Again, this is before Corona, when you could have large groups for up to 150 kids from 6th to 12th grade. We celebrate the festivals of all the religions. So whether that's an iftar meal, a Hanukkah celebration, a Christmas event, an Easter event, Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, you know, we have a festival every 5 minutes in Jerusalem. We're very blessed with many festivals and fast days and special events. And that's really great opportunity for the kids to share about their families and their stories around those festivals. We have town hall events with political and religious leaders who are role models for the kids in terms of peace activism, an MUN program, and even occasionally an olive harvest. When we do the programs, we do them in a sort of informal education environment. As Rabbi mentioned, I grew up in Australia. I was a teacher at Mount Scobus College in Melbourne, which I'm sure some of you have heard of for many years, where I was in charge of informal education there, also in charge of the Building Bridges through Interfaith Dialogue program. And so a lot of the way we educate is not like through a lecture, but rather through games, through circles, through different activities, which is again not how most people educate in Jerusalem, but again something that we want to bring to our activities. So you can see there that the kids sort of playing games there in our programs. We also have summer camps as well. Again, before Corona, in the last 2 years, unfortunately, we haven't had them, but hopefully they'll return soon. And we also have a trip to Belfast where we go and speak to Protestants, to Catholics who suffered, immense loss during the Troubles from, the 1960s until the Good Friday Agreement. And we learn about how Belfast, which is still obviously a very divided city, still a city that has a war through it, but by speaking to bereaved parents, to police, to schools, to politicians in Stormont, hearing their stories of how they, went through many failed peace processes in the same way we have here through Oslo, to eventually have a successful peace process that, while not, I wouldn't necessarily call Northern Ireland at peace, but very much not at war in the way that it was during the Troubles. And so that for us serves as a model for looking at Jerusalem through different eyes. This is Beit Hanina, where Jessica lives. I'll just skip that for now. And this is just some photos of our kids that Jessica leads in the 6th grade. So this was our iftar meal in our office in Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood I'll talk about shortly, which is where we operate. And you can see there, Jewish, Muslim, Christian kids eating together kosher and halal food. Even this year, we avoided plastic plates, which was a big achievement for us to get off the plastic plates. So you can see their bowls that we all washed as well. And that's a little bit about what happens at Kids for Peace. I could talk about it for hours, but it's an organization I'm very proud to be a part of. And I think what we do in Jerusalem is incredibly important to give these kids an opportunity to experience something that, if not for Kids for Peace, they wouldn't experience anywhere else.
I want to ask both of you, if that's okay. It's moving to see that work and to hear how passionate you are about it. I want to ask you about high points and low points, and if each of you could say something about what's been a high point in it and what you see as one of the low points or real challenges or difficulties. And with that question of challenges, after that, I want to bring you in, Rabbi Yoav, because we the two of us had a conversation in which you talked about how challenging the last time has been. So let's start with high points though, and then Jessica, coming to you as something which has been a high point for you.
So being a high point is being able to lead younger kids, to give them what I have learned throughout the years. This has been a very high point for me. Being a role model for many people that look up to me, talking to many groups and hearing amazing feedback, trying to inspire other people with what I do here in Jerusalem and what we do as a whole in the organization has been a really high point for myself. And not, like, to be more specific, one of the highest points I've experienced is going to Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. and talking to senators and I've actually talked to Mr. Biden, not Mr. Biden, what's his name?
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders, yes, mixed up. And it was a very high point to see such political people that are interested in our work and I was 14 at the time. So imagine having a senator or someone with such an important place listening to a 14-year-old and what she has to say. So it's really inspiring and shows that it's what we do can be effective, it is a very high point for me that I can be successful at some point and to help inspire other people with what I have learned throughout the years. On the contrary, there are many times where you question whatever you do. For example, what's been happening for the past few months here in Jerusalem, lots of violence, the problems. So you kind of question, like, what am I doing? Like, what happened to all the work that I've done? What happened to all the meetings, all the sessions, all the dialogues? And what's going on in Jerusalem isn't easy at all, and it wasn't an easy period for our organization. I had to stop meeting with the kids, and it wasn't safe to meet, and it was a very يعني it shaked the organization. At least it shaked me for a bit, and it was like maybe like a 1 day, 2 day, I was like shook, and I didn't know what to think or what to feel. So this was one of the lowest points I've experienced like throughout the organization as a whole. But you gotta remember all the good memories and all the good things you do, and that we have to still have hope, because if we lose hope, then who's going to continue with all the good work and trying to make Jerusalem a better place? So, yeah.
One of, I think, the responsibilities of communities abroad is to support your morale and appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you for that. Itai, the same questions, and then I'm going to ask Yoav about, use the phrase, Jessica, that shook me, and I sort of going to put that phrase to Yoav in a minute.
So thank you for sharing that, Jessica. And I think for me, I've been working at Kids for Peace now for close to 3 years now. And I think even though, it's meant to be a program for the youth, I think sometimes the most powerful experience in Kids for Peace is actually the staff, the people who are actually running the programs, because I've been a teacher my whole life, and if you told me tomorrow teach mathematics, which I know nothing about, I can just get a book and there's a lesson on how to teach algebra or Pythagoras or I don't know, whatever you do in mathematics. There's no book on how to run a peace organization in East Jerusalem during a time of war. No one else in the world is doing that. No one knows how to do it. No one knows how to do it well. And even though there are other peace organizations which I speak to all the time, we are, I guess, inventing the wheel every day, working out, does this work? Does that work? Does this location work? How do we word this flyer? How do we deal with this parent that's uncomfortable about something? What do we do with the financial issues? Like, there's a million questions that come up every day that you kind of are just on your own, and you're trying to work out how to do that. And the people that you solve those problems with are your staff. And through solving those problems, that's where you feel peace, because you all of a sudden have to talk about, how do we do a meal when everyone wants food from different places? Or what do we do about prayer on camp? That was a 2-hour conversation. How does everyone pray in a way that fits in with their religious traditions and times, in a way that doesn't have to separate everyone for all of Friday and Saturday? And we came up with a solution for that as well, and lots of other examples. That I think what we're trying to do is, because Jerusalem is not a city at peace, it's a city that's very segregated. We have separate bus lines, separate schools, separate languages, etc. And so what we're trying to do is imagine peace, and by imagining peace, you have to imagine all of these structures and systems and show how they work. And we make them work, not fantastically. I'm not saying every program is a success, but that's what we try and do. In terms of a low point, I guess for me, and she's not on this call, but another one of our staff members, Suma, lives in Sheikh Jarrah, in the neighborhood where our office is. And I don't know how many of you know about what's been happening in Sheikh Jarrah, but there's 28 houses there that are currently under eviction, and Suma lives in one of these houses that's under eviction. And so for us, it's very difficult having, especially for me, I guess, and as an Israeli Jew, having a friend and colleague of mine living in a home that potentially in a month or a year or 10 years, I don't know how long these court cases and appeals would go for, but at a certain point that she might be kicked out of her house. And the reason she might be kicked out of her house is because next to her house, there's a tomb of a man called Shimon HaTzadik. For those that aren't familiar with Shimon HaTzadik, he was a sage at the time of the temples, and it's believed that he's buried there. And so the land was purchased by Jews in the 1870s, and there's a law in Israel that was passed in 1970 that allows Jews who live in West Jerusalem or other places in the country to reclaim land from East Jerusalem, even though Palestinians have been living in it for 60 or 70 years. But the law doesn't allow Palestinians who lost land in West Jerusalem, where I live in Baka and Katamon and Talbiya, to reclaim land that they lost from Jews. So it's a discriminatory law, which is why the court sort of rules in favor of the settlers that want to take Suma's land and her house that she's grown up with. And that for me is awful that is allowed to happen in a Jewish state. And the worst thing is, if you know anything about Shimon HaTzadik, one of his most famous lines was Al shlosha dvarim ha'olam hamed, al Torah, al avodah, al gemilut chasadim. Gemilut chasadim means loving kindness. So in people who so-called want to honor this sage who taught us that we should live in loving kindness want to do that by removing my friend from her home, which to me is heartbreaking. And so that to me is one of the big challenges of working in a peace organization in Sheikh Jarrah, where at the same time my religion and my values that I love and care for, which is part of why I want to make Jerusalem my home and raise my children here, the same religion that I use as inspiration to do peace work is also being used to expel other people from their homes.
It's very, very vivid and painful the way you speak about that. And I'm sure we'll come back to it. Rabbi Yoav, Rav Yoav from Hanaton, I'd like to bring you in here. Jessica and Itai, don't go. Ayala, if you leave us all on the screen. Rav Yoav, we had this conversation because we met at Hanaton. You took me and a small group of us from England to meet the leadership of Kramanda and other local villages, and you've got years and years of working together. And I wanted to ask you a bit about why is that work so important to you at Hanaton, and high points, and then you said very, very challenging the last period of time, and you can tell us a bit about those challenges. Yeah. You're muted still.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's it. Great.
First of all, thank you for having me in this very interesting evening. Just listening to Jessica and Itai, I have to say that I'm moved. And so, Rabbi Jonathan, you've asked him about high points and low points. Well, I would say that we've been working. We're in the Galilee, so our situation is a bit different from Jerusalem. In some senses, and we've been working for the last 10 years with our neighbors here in the Galilee, because the Galilee is really roughly 50% Jewish, a little less than 50% Jewish, and a little more than 50% non-Jewish, mainly Muslim, also Christian, and there are great opportunities here, and I would say that we've seen that if I were to be talking about how high points, that we've seen that if you're consistent about your work, and if you don't change your place or don't change the people, and you're there year in and year out, then you start to see the ripple effect, meaning you touch the children, and then you touch the parents, you start seeing things that are happening. It still is very minor considering, the big village or the big city. But because we've been doing this for 10 years in about 6-7 different villages, although with different students of ours, but the staff doesn't change so much, then sometimes you feel at home. What does that mean that you feel at home? That means that you know your neighbors, social leaders and religious leaders, and then when tough times happen, like it just happened a few weeks ago, you have those strong connections that you can ring someone, you could go, you could gather up, because you're rooted in these places. So I would say that the high points is that we feel that we have something very strong connections with our neighbors. And in some senses, we're able to walk through these hard waters, if that's an expression you can use. But I have to say, also listening to Jessica and to Itai, that the low point, I wouldn't say it's one low point, but the situation that I think that we're in, that at least I'm feeling that we're putting so much work, Kids for Peace and a lot of other organizations, that also sometimes maybe these organizations are working very much apart, and everybody's trying to invent the wheel, because in some senses this is all new, but it's not so new. We've been doing this for several decades, 5 at least, maybe even more, and we're feeling that all the work that we're doing, and Jessica talked about this, that all the work that we're doing, it's so hard to build, and then it's so easy to destroy, if you could say that. And if we were just looking a few weeks ago at the riots that we've been having in Israel, and you look at the young generation, and in some senses you're feeling that the young generation is becoming more violent, more extreme, less knowledge of Hebrew or of Arabic, less knowledge of the other and its culture. So in some senses, you're asking yourself, should we be more serious about the work that we're doing, or are we in the right direction? Because so much work is being put out there, and you have to look at the reality. I mean, we always try to hold that hope. We say, like in Hanukkah, like one light, would light another light, et cetera, et cetera. So we always have that hope, but also we have to look at the reality, and we have to see what should we learn from what's going on here. So I think that's where I am right now.
Thank you. It's also very, very vivid, and I'm going to try and sort of keep this conversation between us going a bit, and then bring in questions maybe in just 10 or 12 minutes. Jessica, you were nodding a lot there about this question of, and I wanted to put, do you feel the relationships are holding? Because Kids for Peace has likewise built relationships. You mentioned you've been there 10 years and you're very young. Are the relationships holding through these difficult times? And do you feel that the direction of the Kids for Peace work is the right one? It's a time of asking questions. I suppose that's to both you and to Itai.
Well, it's a tough question to answer, but well, it really depends on the person. If the person has the right values, and it really kind of, as I mentioned, depends on the person. If the person is willing to stay involved in the organization and is willing to put effort in the relationship, it still continues. Like while we were in the crisis and like problems going on, and lots of people are getting arrested and etc. I got a phone call from Itai, let's say, for example, just to hear and to check about me, and that is a really important phone call, to feel that like I do matter to other people, even though that I'm from a different religion, I'm from a different culture. So that means a lot. I also got lots of text messages from people outside of the country and people from also different religions. And it's true that I still have many connections and many friendships from Kids for Peace. Not to say not all of them, of course, but the majority is, yes. Kids for Peace builds a community, and lots of friendships stay in touch. And like no matter how far people may go, or like how far they reach out, they still like maybe can come back, and like you still know someone from the same organization you were at, or the same place we've traveled together, or something like that. So I would say yes. And what was the other question? Sorry.
I mean, that's great. I'm gonna move to Itai with that, and then come back to all of you. Thank you. Itai, you're muted.
One of my favorite places in Jerusalem is a place called Park HaMesila. For those of you that don't know, Jerusalem doesn't have a beach, but people here want to do exercise because, we all like doing exercise. And there was this old train line that used to go from Jerusalem to Jaffa. I think it took like 5 hours. You could probably go faster on a donkey, but anyway, it existed for many years. And about 10 years ago, they turned this old train line into a beautiful walking path. And now it's about 4 kilometers, and it goes from the first station in Emek Rephaim, where I live, all the way down to Beit Safafa. And it's a place where a lot of people do exercise. And also, like on Shabbat, it's a park, and people sit there and have lunches, and there's trees, and they're now putting electric bikes there, and there's sometimes music there and libraries, and it's a cultural space. But it's one of the few places that is shared in the sense that everyone uses it, because not only is it a good place to do exercise, but also gets you from one place to the other, from Beit Safafa, and it goes through 4 or 5 different neighborhoods, through Baka and Makor Chaim and all of that, all the way to the first station. So I used to walk there for all the time. I do, I try and walk 2 or 3 times a week, like most people do. And when you walk in a new city, you don't know anyone. And now when I walk there, almost every time I walk there, I see someone from Kids for Peace. It could be a child, it could be a parent, it could be a co-worker. But the fact that I walk on this path and I see people that I know makes me feel like a little bit, like it just means that when I hear someone Arabic, that instead of being a little bit afraid of, oh, there's someone speaking Arabic around, what is that? I think now, oh, that could be my friend. And I hope that everyone else who is in Kids for Peace, whether they're Israeli or Palestinian, because a lot of our Palestinian kids live in Beit Safafa, would also feel the same way now when they walk on, when they hear the other language. It's instead of being afraid or being a threat, they might think of that person as a friend. And that's, again, that's a long way from peace, but it's just a small example of something that we're doing for our members.
See, the message, what's coming across from all of you is that the relationships, if you have them, if they're real enough and deep enough, they can hold in spite of everything. I don't know, that would be a fair summary. Back to you, Rav Yoav. The relationships are holding that you have even under pressure. Is that right? And I felt that kind of hope. Jessica said, if one loses hope, one loses really, I mean, not quite everything, but one loses so much. How does one hold on hope? What will nourish hope? I'm coming to you, Rav Yoav, with that.
Ken, I don't want to sound too much like a rabbi, but this is Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. Well, at least it was until
still is here.
Fasted today. So we thought, one of the tradition teaches us that we fast. One of the reasons is because Moshe going down from Mount Sinai broke the Luchot HaBrit,
tablets.
I'm not sure how you say the tablets. And I think the true miracle is that after he broke the tablets, he went up again to get the Luchot Shneim, the new tablets. And that, I think, teaches us hope. But the reason that he did that is, I'll say this in Hebrew, is the Habrit Chazaka min hadibrot, meaning the connection, the covenant is stronger than the words, than the words themselves, than the I'm sorry for my English. But what I'm trying to say that, first of all, saying that what we say, Kol od hanir dolek efshar letaken, there is always hope. It's not only a saying. That is really reality. But really is if we know how to structure that covenant or that trust with one another, I think we can overcome almost everything, even breaking the Luchot HaBrit. Meaning things can break down, things will break down. The question is our generation strong enough to create that trust between Jews and Arabs, between Muslims, Christians, Jews, what have you made? And we have to work on that trust. And I think it's part of our generation's mission, really. And it's hard work. And it does not happen if you do not believe in it. So I believe this with all my heart. And when I hear young people saying it also, it makes me filled up with more hope. It's not that reality is not discouraging in a lot of senses. And it's hard work. And as I said, there's a lot of disbelief, a lot of people who want to destroy. Israel has a ministry for security. Why doesn't it have a ministry for building peace? Doesn't that make sense? I mean, if we put our energy and our resources, but in some senses, when you see violence, then talking about peace sounds naive, sounds disconnected from reality. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think there's hope. And the hope is because we have strong connections that we build trust. And so the people who do that work need just to be stronger and wiser. And I think it's easy to give up, really, because there's a lot of lessons we have to learn, which I'm not always sure we're learning. And there's a lot of things to learn from the world and from one another. But I'd say I have a lot of hope and a lot of belief, but I also know that that a lot of people are being burnt out, if you may, in some senses, but the inspiration is greater than that.
I just wanted to add to that point, just about hope and trust. John Kerry, who was a former US Secretary of State, he spent like hundreds of hours negotiating between Tzipi Livni and Saeb Erekat, over 4 or 5 years. And in 2016, he gave a speech, with his last speech as Secretary of State, which is, I think, a speech everyone should read. And he says in this speech, all the issues that separated Israeli Palestinians, we had solutions for, about land, about borders, about refugees, we came to agreements on everything. So then they said, okay, so why didn't you sign a peace agreement? He said, because there's zero trust. What happened was, in these negotiations, no one trusted the other side that they would keep the commitments that they had made in the agreement, and the kal vachomer that applies to the people as well. That there's no one really believes that the other side would keep their word in any agreement, which is why a big reason now why you don't have peace. And so for me, something I take from that is, and there's lots of surveys where people ask Israeli children, do you trust Palestinians? 79% of Israelis children don't trust Palestinians, don't believe there's a partner of peace. And on the Palestinian side, 90% of Palestinians don't trust Israelis or believe Israelis are a partner for peace. And as you get older, the numbers get lower, but the younger generation is actually more disbelieving in peace than even the older generation. It's different from, how it appears in other countries, which I think why a peace organization working with youth is so important, because before you can even talk about peace, you need to build trust. But you can't build trust while there's injustice, while there are, whether it's rocket attacks or terrorism or house demolitions or whatever's, the things going on in Al-Aqsa, at the Damascus Gate, all of these sorts of things, you can't build trust while these things are happening. So you need to, I guess, to create peace, you need two things to happen. You need a political track that is doing things that stop injustice to both people. And then you also need what I would call a grassroots track, which is what we and all the organizations that are part of AllMep are doing in terms of building relationships and building trust. And without both of those things happening at the same time, you end up continuing being in the cycles of violence and occupation and terrorism and all of those things that we're stuck in at the moment.
Jessica, do you feel that do you come under pressure for the contact you have with Kids for Peace and people saying you can't trust, or are you supported by, you may not be able to want to answer this, but are you supported by sort of family, by friends, by school in this work? Were you supported by school and now in your round of studies, or is there kind of, is trust sort of somehow under attack?
Well, at first, many people did not like what I did and that I was in an organization like Kids for Peace. They did not believe in my values and they did not agree with what I thought. They thought that it's treason to the Palestinians. It's treason to what the Palestinians believe. On the contrary, I do not believe that. I believe that this is a way for the Palestinian voice to reach the other side, for Jews to get to know what it's like to be a Palestinian, what's it like living, what's it like, what we eat, how we talk, what we do in our daily life. So I still believe that this is a chance. Of course, both of my parents are very supportive of the organization, and my sister is in the organization as well. She's in 9th grade at the moment. And at first I was worried that people would not accept me and would stop being friends with me because I was in such a place, because I wanted to explore. Going back to the reason why I joined, I wanted to explore, I wanted to get to know other people, because I'm walking in the streets and I'm seeing people who are different from me and I don't have any clue about who they are or what they're doing or where they come from. So at first I was worried and scared, and I always thought about what people used to think about me. I didn't want to feel judged. But as time passed by, I got used to it, and I didn't care anymore. I didn't have the time to think about what people thought about me, about what the work I do, and what kind of impact I'm trying to have on other people. So as for negative comments, you do hear them sometimes, but it's just not listening to them anyways. So it's just keeping out the negative energy away and still believing in what you do and keeping your positive mentality and energy going. At the moment, I can't say that I'm receiving as much negative energy as much when I started, because when I started, people were like, "Oh my God!" And I went into an Arabic school, and lots of people there are like anti-Israelis and Jews, and but I did not believe in that, and I wanted to have a change. I wanted to be people to know what it's like to be a Christian girl living here in Jerusalem, as many different people from all over the world just ask. I'm like, hey, I'm from Jerusalem, and then the only assumption they have is a Muslim. So this is my role as a Christian person and a Christian girl to talk to, like, from the minority of the minority, to talk and have my voice out there for people to hear and to learn. And yeah, I do believe in what I work, what I do, and all the programs I pass for the kids. And I'm hoping that people, like, I've seen people that have been influenced with what we do as an organization, and my hope and goal is to keep influencing more people. And yeah.
It's moving to hear that, and there's courage there as well, and real conviction. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Matt, who's been fielding questions, and there are 2 or 3 that have come in. So, Matt, do you want to put the first question to everybody? And I don't really want to say it to everybody or to say who.
Sure. So I think just one proviso is that the people, just it's probably obvious, but I think that our panelists tonight are all educators and youth workers and community builders, not politicians. So I think that's the kind of discussion we need to be having. Although we can't get away from politics, but I think that the best kinds of questions will be for them as in their roles, rather than to try and get kind of political insight, which I'm sure there'll be another time for that. The first question came from Yvonne, and Yvonne says that we know that there are many organizations working for peace and coexistence in Israel, but their voices do not seem to reach the political leadership. See, we got to politics. Why do you think this is, and how can this change? And that was for everyone. So whoever.
Okay. I'm going to go to you, Yoav, with that one first. That's okay.
Well, first of all, I have to say that what we hear a lot in the communications, and this is no secret to anyone, what makes the news and what doesn't. I think that political leaders who want to be aware and know about these peace building projects they could be pretty much knowledgeable. Part of our responsibility is to try to reach them and educate them, or to show them what's going on. I think that the saying that politicians sign agreements and people build peace is true, but it's not an excuse why these organizations are not promoted enough. So I don't have a good reason for. I don't have a good answer why do not politicians promote. But I would say, and I'm being a little bit political right now. For the last I think 12 years, it's not that the right wing does not want peace, but I would say that the government was attached to different organizations. Maybe that will change. I'm not really sure. But I can say that I'm seeing on the ground interesting initiatives that politicians know about. We'll see where that gets us. So that's my answer, which I guess is not very clear, but because the situation is not very clear to me. That's it.
Itai, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer this. I'm also a journalist in my other job, and so I consume a lot of news, and I obviously write a lot of news for the Australian Jewish community about Israel and Jerusalem, and I manage social media as well for Plus 61J, And one of the things that I notice is when I look at what are other news sites reporting each day, to give me inspiration for what I should be reporting on, is often the videos and photos that go most viral are the violent videos. So, there was this TikTok challenge where Arab boys were slapping Haredim on the light rail, and in late April, these were going viral on social media. Arab boys beating up Jewish boys on the light rail, and then there's a website, an Instagram page called Eye on Palestine that has hundreds of videos every day of Israeli soldiers doing, dragging women from their homes, firing tear gas in mosques, really horrific violence. And it's obviously edited in a certain way that you only see Palestinians as victims of violence, and the Jewish pages are all edited in a way that you only see Jewish victims of violence. So you never sort of get what happened before or after. You just get sort of one perspective of your religion or culture being seen as the victim of very intense violence. And then young people who spend a lot more time on social media than old people watch this, and that's why they don't trust people on the other side. And it's also why you have these political problems as well that the rabbi was speaking about, because I think that for politicians to act, they need lobby groups. And at the moment, there's much more lobby groups advocating on both Palestine and Israel for either the status quo or what I would consider to be worse than the status quo. And the lobby groups for peace are few and far between. And that's partly because the stories about peace are not heard. The story I mentioned about Beit Safafa is never gonna, and the light and the coexistence that I see on Parka Messiah is never going to be a top news story. But God forbid, and this happens occasionally, if a Jew beats up an Arab or an Arab beats up a Jew on Parka Messiah, yeah, I guarantee you that's going to lead to the news. So because we look for the stories of non-coexistence, and we promote them a lot more than we do the stories of cooperation and dialogue, and that happens all over the world. But then that feeds into a certain reality. So I think, again, to influence the politics, you need two things. One, you need to reduce the injustice, and then that's a political question of how you do that. But then you also need to tell stories of coexistence and hope that they go as viral and people share them and post them as much as the stories of violence do as well.
Jessica, I don't know whether you want to be drawn on this, but if you do want to join this, responding to this question, is that your experience as well, that the images and stories of violence go viral and the kind of things you do don't?
Well, yes. These kinds of, as Itai mentioned, I have an Instagram account and I check social media, and as Itai mentioned, that in the pro-Palestinian side always show that the other side is a victim, and on the other side it's the same thing. And it really hurts that we were talking about the video last meeting at the office, that there was a video that the first 10 seconds show that the Israeli side, the Palestinian side is a victim, and that the other 10 seconds show that the Israeli side is a victim. So it's people playing with the videos sometimes. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes people do make wrong things, and it really hurts to see. But on many of the times, it's people playing with videos and trying to put the wrong image. And not only on Instagram, but also on Facebook, on Snapchat, on TikTok, on wherever you go, there's lots of, you could see many different things, and you see two biased sides towards two different types of people. And it really hurts to see this, because it does not show all the good times and all the peace organizations and all of the dialogues and all of the things that many different people do, because as Itai also mentioned, and that the younger generation only want to see when they see one thing, they truly they believe it. They do not know if it's fake news or not. They see something, they're like, oh my God, this is true. And they want to spread out the word as fast as possible because it's something that was really bad, and they don't focus on the good. So I think this is a problem, that social media has created this this thing that sometimes it's not true what you see, and many people are deceived. I'm not talking on only one side, I'm talking on the both sides, and that the sides are not connected. Like they showed two different stories but for the same event, and there's no like one story for like whatever happened, etc. So that really hurts to see, and sometimes confusing for me as a person, because you don't know what's the truth, like what actually really happened, because like you're looking at the story from two different sides and it's totally like completely different what's being said. So yeah.
Thank you. And that's why it's so important to know the languages, which is where you and Itai began. Matt, we've probably got time for one more sort of major question.
So I'm gonna beg for an extra minute so we can have two questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Do you want to put them both now and then?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one question. I'm actually, to abuse my position here, but one question's from me, which is that we're aware. I'm interested in the complexities of trying to do relationship building and dialogue and peace building in a situation of inequality. And we know that there's inequality between Jews and Palestinians in Israel-Palestine on lots and lots of different levels. And I wonder how that complicates the efforts to build relationships. So that's one, and I assume it does, but you can tell me whether it does or not. And the second question, which comes from, actually there was a couple of related questions, but Deanna wanted to know whether there are sister organisations here in London for young people and even for adults, because it's also inspiring. And how can she get involved? And Yasmin asks, very simply, how can we get involved and help? So I brought the cynical question, and some of our participants brought the nicer question with an action.
So let's start with the difficult question, and let's conclude with how can we help and what is there, around the world for us to help. Inequality in dialogue. Itai, do you want to begin on that one?
I'd rather do how you can help, but I think it'd be better if Jessica does the
Jessica
question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So this is one of the hardest questions I have ever got on a session with a dialogue. I don't know the answer to that, to say the least, because I'm still young and I was still a youth a few years ago. Growing up in the country, you always see inequality between two sides of people, that one side is being protected while the other side, you don't feel safe. You don't feel safe walking. Like, for example, many times I do not feel safe walking by a group, certain, like, for example, the police or the IDF, or it scares me for some reason. I don't feel safe sometimes. And now with knowing the language, it's a bit more comfortable because you can defend yourself. You can say 1, 2, 3. I'm not doing anything wrong. But beforehand, it really did scare me because not everyone speaks perfect English, and when I speak Arabic, then khalas, it's total chaos. Now I feel a bit more comfortable, but still, for many different people, it's hard to say because I'm working in an organization, and the country itself says that it's a democratic country where one side is being treated differently from the other side. One side has more rights, and like a basic, simple something. When a Jew wants to build, for example, a house, or he wants to buy a piece of land, he could do it like this. But for families, I know families who have waited about from 10 to 15 years just to get the issue to build the land and to be able just to build a home. And you face so many different inequalities sometimes. When I walk in the university, like, my miftah, my dialect is not, I'm not Israeli. You can tell from my dialect. Sometimes you get these certain looks from people that, oh, you're Arab, and they look at you in a certain way. It's very complicated when I face these kind of inequalities in my life, as not only as an Arab, but also as a girl as well. It shows like I'm trying to teach my kids that there should be equality and justice between both sides, that we are both equal, that we should be both on the same scale. But at the same time, that I'm facing these kinds of inequalities, and the kids as well are facing these kinds of inequalities. Like the kids, for example, have to go when they want to go visit family in Ramallah or in the West Bank, they have to go through security and they have to go through a checkpoint, which I think is something very horrible. Just to go see family, you have to wait in line and sometimes lots of traffic, and it takes hours. Before there were no checkpoints, it would take like literally 2 minutes to get from, like, I live right next to the border, and it would take literally 2 minutes to get right across from the wall. And now it takes at least like 2-3 hours just to get to the same place. And it really hurts. And sometimes I do not know the answer. Like when a kid asks my kids are still very young, but when a kid asks, oh, there's no inequality, what can I do? It's a very complicated question. And unfortunately, I do not know the answer to that, because I don't know what to say when I'm experiencing this kind of inequality and this kind, like, it hurts. And so this is why I'm here. I'm trying to make a difference, to let other people know that I'm here and I'm a minor, like a minor community here, and I want my voice to be heard, and I want to make the situation a better place and a safer place, not only for Arabs as Palestinians, but also for Jews to feel comfortable around Arabs and not to be scared whenever they see someone who's Arab or speaks Arabic. So this is why I'm here, and this is why I'm doing my work, because I want to feel that I'm equal. I want to feel that my voice is being heard. I want to feel safe. I want to feel comfortable in my home. And I want to feel comfortable in my own study place. I want to feel comfortable in my university. I want to feel comfortable speaking my own language. So yeah, this is why I'm here, and this is why I want to make a change.
It's a really, really important answer. It's extremely important that we heard what you said, which has got a lot of courage in it. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Yoav, do you want to say something on this subject, or do you want to move on to how you feel people, from abroad and from the UK can help?
Well, I'll say something very short because because it's a very big question. I'll say something very short. I'm not gonna say more than that, but I would say when I talk to, I would say my Arab partners or neighbors or people who I work with, I look at them, as we say, in the eye. That means that I demand from them things that I also demand from myself. And I know there is inequality. By the way, there is how do you say that? Inequality. Thank you. There is inequality in many levels. Also inside, at least in the Galilee, when you go in an Arab village, there's inequality inside the village. There's inequality between Jews, and there's a lot of. I'm not saying there's not inequality. There's definitely inequality. But when I try to do the work that I do, I do not. How do you say? Meaning that because there is inequality, I could be less serious about the work that I do. That means, to say this very short, I think we should know that there is a struggle that we have to struggle. We have to make sure there is equality for all citizens in the state of Israel. But the fact that there's not equality yet does not mean that we should not demand from each other certain rights and certain behaviors. Because there is fear on both sides, and there is a feeling of being a victim on both sides, whether that makes sense or not. So that's all I'm going to say about this topic. It's a big question, but that's all I'm going to say about this same topic. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Just really, I mean, it seems to me that question raises, the grounds for a whole lot of further discussions, which which we need to sort of revisit more profoundly than. It's very important to hear. But we're sort of at the close of our time now, so I'm going to go to Itai. There's Kids for Peace. If you look on their website, it's there has an international aspect to it. And what brings hope, and are there how can, not so much what brings hope, how can we help?
Yeah. So just as Matt asked the question, I quickly made a few slides to answer that. But first, I just want to thank Jessica for your answer, because I think it was incredible that you said that and you spoke from the heart, because it really sums up the inequality and the challenges of Palestinians being part of Kids for Peace. So thank you for that answer. So just to separate this answer into a few things. Firstly, organizations in the UK. So the two that I know personally, because Kids for Peace have spoken with them, is FODIP, the Forum for Discussion of Israel and Palestine, and another is Solutions Not Sides. So both of these organizations do in the UK dialogue, and they present to schools about both Israeli and Palestinian narratives. You can invite them to your school, to your synagogue, to your youth movement, or you can be members of them and and be part of their work. So I highly recommend. My experience with both of them has been very positive. In terms of what you can do, I think the first thing is get your news from multiple sources. So I've listed there all the news sites from Israel, and I've listed the political bias of each one. So from 972 on the far left to Times of Israel in the center to Al Shever on the right. If you want to know what happened today, spend a few minutes reading the same story on different news sites, and you'll get a very broader picture than just reading the news site that confirms your political opinion. And then if you want to go even further, also read Arab and Palestinian news sites to understand how the news of the day is being received in Palestinian homes, whether that's through Al Jazeera, Al Monitor, the Wafa News Agency, or Ramallah Mix. I think reading both stories will make you understand why are people angry today? Why are people celebrating, something that you find abhorrent or whatever it is? Like reading the news and not just getting the news from Instagram, I think is really important. And all those sites are available in English or through Google Translate. The next thing is I would really recommend to educate yourself. This conflict didn't start today. It started a very, very long time ago. And there's two excellent books that I often recommend to groups when they come to Kids for Peace. For the Israeli narrative, a book by Yossi Klein Halevi called Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, and for the Palestinian narrative, a book called Where the Line is Drawn by Raja Shahada. He's a Palestinian author who lives in Ramallah, and the book is really a series of dialogues between him and his and a friend of his who's a Canadian Jew. And Yossi Klein Halevi's book is Letters to a Palestinian Neighbor in Silwan. And the idea of both those books is, I guess one person of one nation explaining their narrative to another. And then if you Google both authors, you'll find a series of letters that they've written to each other in the New York Times as well, which is also really interesting as for someone that wants to sort of do a book club or a deeper understanding of this. They're two books that I recommend. If you want to know more about Kids for Peace, there's a great podcast on a podcast called The Branch. Episode 13 is called Kid Power, and you'll meet two of our youth and hear their challenges and struggles of working together. So that's a great podcast to listen to. And then finally, if you would like to make a donation, we're not a particularly wealthy organization, and any donations are always greatly appreciated for your bar or bat mitzvah or for your wedding. If you want to support our organization, we have a link that you can donate through the UK through Virgin Money, and that's always greatly appreciated. And we really, because we run off donations, we don't get any government funding for Israel or Palestine. Frankly, we don't want government funding from either governments for obvious reasons, and so those donations make a big difference from us. And then finally, if you want to visit us in Jerusalem or follow what we do on Instagram, then that's my email address, and I'm always happy to be in contact with you. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our stories tonight.
Thank you. And I'm hoping that, Matt, we can share all those slides, if that's okay with you, Itai.
Sure. Yeah.
We're going to close now. It's a huge, huge thank you. It was so much to think about. It's very moving to listen to all of you, Jessica, everything you said, but that last answer, as Itai mentioned as well. And Rav Yoav, I think, we have connections with Hanaton, and just appreciate your leadership and your work and your thoughtfulness about the relationships, in the sense of looking for honesty in them. And Itai, the eloquence with which you described the challenges that face all of you. Very, very, very grateful to you. Thank you so much. Really, thank you. And Ayala and Matt have put up the third of this series, but we'll be coming back to it next year. And we'll look for more depth as well if we can over the course of a whole year's reflections. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
مساء
you.
الخير.
مساء الخير.
Yeah.
Thank you.